Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those out in the East. We're going to give it just a few minutes or a couple minutes to let everybody flow in. We're just going to give it one more minute. I think there's more people that are entering the session, and then we'll kick it off. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Scheckman, and I'm the Regional Vice President for Robert Half. I oversee our British Columbia and Manitoba operations in Western Canada. Thank you for joining today's session. It was exciting to see 500 people from across North America register for this event. And I'm thrilled to bring together today's panel as we take an in-depth look at how COVID-19 has disrupted the workplace in significant ways and evolving the way HR is effectively navigating the ever-changing landscape. Now, before we begin, I would like to address a few housekeeping items. We will be recording today's webinar and it will be available for on-demand viewing. A follow-up email with a link to the recording will be shared post-event. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion, so please enter your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our very best to answer as many as possible. Your participation is also important for us today, as we will have 4 polling questions throughout, and we encourage your engagement throughout. So now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our distinguished panel. This lady requires no introduction. Claude Silver is VaynerMedia's first Chief Heart Officer, and I can tell you from my own personal interaction with her, she's all about heart. Claude has been instrumental in scaling VaynerMedia's organization, more than doubling it in size to 1,000 people strong. Her 3-decade career includes leadership positions at major advertising agencies and consultative engagements with a variety of clients across the US. Now, going left to right, we got Steve. Steve Cadigan is a highly sought after talent advisor to executives and organizations globally. His clients include Google, Salesforce, the Royal Bank of Scotland, and the BBC. Top venture capitalists and consulting firms such as Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, and McKinsey regularly retain Steve for his insight and expertise. He speaks at conferences in major universities around the world, including Harvard and Stanford, and throughout his career, the teams, cultures, and organizations he has led been recognized as exceptional world-class performers by both Wall Street Journal and Fortune magazine. Steve has worked as an HR executive for over 25 years at a wide range of companies and industries, and his HR career was actually capped by serving as the first CHRO for LinkedIn. Next we have is Giselle. Giselle Blackman is the head of human resources at Connor, Clark and Lunn Financial Group, known as CCL to many, where she's responsible for leading the firm's HR transformation, driving its diversity and inclusion initiatives and HR business strategy. She brings 20 years experience in HR in both union and non-unionized environments, working for organizations including Concert Properties, TransLink, Colliers International, and 7-Eleven. At TransLink, she played an instrumental role in helping to move the world as part of TransLink's transportation project team during the 2010 Winter Olympics right here in Vancouver. And finally, last but certainly not least, the founder of her own consulting business, Brenda Rigney. Brenda consults with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and family businesses in operationalizing culture solutions such as strategic planning, organizational design, and executive and leadership development. Currently, she's working with the British Columbia Provincial Healthcare Authority in a fractional HR executive role, helping to pivot the HR strategy in response to COVID-19 and coaching leaders through her consulting practice. With a passion for people, Brenda started producing and hosting a microvlog called #3Uniques, where guests share what makes them unique so the right career and business opportunities find them. Claude, Steve, Giselle, Brenda, it's an absolute treat, and I'm grateful to have you all join me on today's session. It actually takes me back to my childhood where my mom used to take me to the ice cream shop with my brothers, and she would say, you get to choose only one flavor, so make it good. And here we are today, instead of choosing one, I get 4 of the best. So thank you for this. Now, before I pass on the baton, I want to have the first poll question populate. So let's have a look at what it is. 2020 has been a tough year, and we know it. And there's a lot of talk right now about the future of work. And with the emphasis of a post-pandemic workplace and what it may look like, the question that I want to pose to you, the audience, is which future work model most appeals to you in a post-pandemic world? So 3 choices should be populated on your screen: 100% remote, which a lot of us were not in that situation. We got the 100% in office. And the third option is hybrid work model. So maybe a combination of going in to the office and of course, working from home. Give it about 30 seconds for people to answer. All right. So 84% of the audience have shared that their ideal work model would be a hybrid work model, which is amazing, amazing. All right, so with that in mind, talking about the future of work, Steve has been an expert, and I would love to hear your insights on this. When considering the future of work, what are organizations implementing to drive innovation and collaboration with varying work models and schedules? And I'm going to tee this question up in a sense, Steve, where when we were back in the office, there are a lot of high impact situations where we would drive innovation just naturally and organically, whether it's in the kitchen or maybe in the bullpen. But how do you drive that when there's so many variations and people working remotely or in the office?
Okay, well, Mike, thank you for inviting me. Robert Half, thanks for hosting the conference. And to my brothers and sisters in HR who have survived the gauntlet of the craziest year of our lives. It's a pleasure to be here on webinar number, 700? And starting 2021 talking about it. But Mike and everyone, when I think about the future of work and innovation, I really feel like we are just at the frontier of what's possible, because we're still in a little bit of the shock and awe. We're still in a little bit of not sure how long this is going to last. And when we think about innovation, it usually results from experimentation. And what I'm seeing is a ton of experimentation happening right now with how we're collaborating, how we're communicating, how we're building those informal interactions, which we don't have in a work from home model so much. And some of the innovations that I'm seeing is, in a really ironic way, we're seeing each other less, but we're seeing more of the personal homes and the home decor of our colleagues than ever before. At some point in the next minute or so, my dog may jump up on me, and then you'll know I have a dog. Or you can see a library behind me. But we're getting into the homes of our colleagues in a way that we've never done before. I think that's a positive. And some of the other really interesting things for me, Mike, are just culturally right now. How do we build those informal connections that drive trust? Because trust is the foundation for how we work together to thrive. And we're not having those opportunities anymore. So I'm seeing companies do things like online gaming competitions where finance takes on HR. We know who's going to win that battle, right? Our natural born enemy, finance, we're going to take them down. But I'm seeing companies start to be able to build games in a way that reveals the tendencies of teams so they can learn by playing games online. And so we're seeing innovation on that front. I'm seeing some companies implement things like what we call sort of coffee bingo, if you will, where they randomly pair you with someone in the organization that you know or you may not know, and you have a random coffee chat with someone at various points during the week and during the month. So we really are, I think, on the frontier of learning new things. I think we're going to have many more stories down the road around what true innovation looks like. But this is the biggest question and the biggest fear that I have right now is how do we, in fact, innovate when we've never worked like this before? And I'm not sure every organization knows the answer, but I am encouraged that we're learning how to experiment a lot more as we go forward. And I'd love to hear from someone else on the panel, maybe Giselle, what are you seeing out there in your world around innovation and implementing new models of work?
Well, thanks, Steve, for the opportunity to respond to this. I think at the end of the day, what I'm seeing is there is a lot of experimentation, even within teams. I mean, as a big organization, yes, there's going to be experimentation across different divisions. However, just within one team, the HR team, the payroll team, we're learning what each other does. I mean, just on my team, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we cross-pollinate? How do we learn from some of the best practices that exist within our own teams? We're also looking at cross-training. How do I learn to help you? How do I understand what are the challenges you're having? So when push comes to shove, we're there for each other. I think the big challenge for us is going to be looking at this model. I mean, we saw the poll question where folks were saying 80-something% of us are thinking that the hybrid model is going to work. So we're going to need to look to be flexible as we move forward, because with half the team working from home or half of them coming in on different days, because I suspect that we're still going to have to do social distancing, we're really going to need to look at some creative ways to create connections. And those connections are not going to come just in the form of the work that we do, but connections in just getting to know each other and just getting to connect in a way that helps us to be more mindful of each other. And last but not least, I think the really key thing that's going to help us as we move forward is being very empathetic. I mean, you talked about the potential of your dog jumping up. I know in many meetings in the beginning when the pandemic started, we were dealing with people who were having their kids walking into the meeting, and that became an understandable part of how we worked. So I think just being a little bit more compassionate and actually being open to what worked today may not work tomorrow, but continuing to be open to changing and evolving as change occurs. Steve, back to you, or Mike, would you like to jump in at this point?
Yeah, let me throw one other perspective on here, Giselle, and
Yes.
that is, in Silicon Valley, we've had a perks arms race, if you will, over the last 2 decades. Where like, I've got a sushi chef. Oh yeah, well we've got an on-site childcare center. Oh yeah, well we've got LeBron James coming for lunch. Now we're all facing a reality in a work from home where the perks arms race is irrelevant. So we're having to face up to, well, who are we? What is our culture? And the culture is the experience of your interactions with people in a vastly different way than we've been interacting with before. It's an incredible challenge, I think, that we all face right now, because what our culture was often was defined by things and places. And now it's defined by human interaction, which to me, I find is really, really fascinating. But okay, Mike, back to you.
I appreciate it. Those are very insightful. Steve, one more question before we do move on. From your perspective, and this is maybe $1 million question for a lot of businesses out there, but if it does end up being that it's 85% that people end up working remotely, or a percentage of it will be remote, what is the office space going to be utilized for? How are we going to really make use of that, and how is that going to evolve as we move ahead?
Yeah, I think we don't know. We really don't know. And we don't really know what our employees really want. Right now, we all feel safer, probably being in non-super spreader environments. But if you're like me, the shelter at home has been like a personal hell because I'm an extrovert. But there's plenty of introverts who are like, yes, this is heaven. So I think we're going to find through experimentation some hybrid models. Most of the big companies, major corporations that I work with right now, are really they've already determined we're going to have some form of hybrid. We don't know what the right mix is, but now they're thinking about where they're going to have new locations and share work locations. And I've got 3 meetings set up this week, in fact, with companies who are building software to map where people in the organization are going to be on certain days, so they can either meet together or determine, should we have an in-person meeting or work remotely. But Mike, it's still really too early to see how this is going to play. And from the people that I'm talking to, whether it's folks in Washington D.C. or other disease control offices, I mean, we're in this at least for 6 months, maybe 9 to 12 more. So I think we still really don't know how it's going to shake out when we're quote unquote, back to the new never normal.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so let's move on and gain some perspective from our audience again about fostering employee engagement and corporate culture. We know that this has been extremely challenging in the environment that we're under. So the question that I'm posing out there, in today's digital era, which soft skill or characteristic is most critical for cultivating engagement and a positive corporate culture? So again, we know that all 6 of the choices are important. We know that a lot of organization and leaders are keying in on these, but what do you feel is most critical to cultivate engagement and a positive corporate culture? Give you guys 30 seconds. All right, the results are in. So emotional intelligence came in with 39%. And we have some between empathy, authenticity, and willingness to listen. Came a close second there. Great. All right, so let's segue. And Claude, thank you again for joining. I hope you had a great long weekend. I know you enjoyed that. So during the pandemic, we talked about leadership. We talked about how people wanted that connection, but which leadership traits have you really focused on and to double down on in order to cultivate and evolve that culture at VaynerMedia?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Wonderful to be here. The number one thing is transparent communication. We're a culture that prides ourselves on being empathetic and collaborating very well together. But I will say we have over-indexed on communication, and that means more all hands from Gary. That means more all company Slacks or emails from myself, videos from Gary, Q&A, so open forum Q&A when anyone can ask Gary any single thing, which is really important because, we're an independently owned company. And so he is really kind of like the master of our destiny in many ways. And he is, and also in many ways, he's the oracle. So hearing from him often is extremely important, or hearing from someone that he's deemed to, be able to scale him in some way, shape, or form. Overall, though, it's thoughtfulness, and it's really leaning in much more on humanity, on raw emotion that comes at us. Certainly as the anxiety when we first started working at home was at an all-time high, certainly after the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, it's raw emotion just coming at us. And by the way, that's okay, and that's humanity. So we've had to also do a lot of training, a lot of leadership training, and really empowering our leaders and teaching our leaders how to hold space. And that means without judgment. It's not about them. You don't have to have all the answers, but you need to be able to exist in a world where questions are okay, where emotion is okay. And right now, I don't see a time in place, at least in my lifetime, where we're going to then all of a sudden go to some, other new way of working, and we're going to decide that we're going to put ourselves in armor again. The door has been, the emotion has been unleashed. good, bad, or indifferent. So those are the types of things that we've really, really leaned in on. But it really all is encompassed under EQ for sure. And again, those are qualities and traits that I believe we do well, but the communication for sure, the training, the allowance of people to really bring whomever they are to work. And that also means, you know, the email I'm about to send out that tomorrow is the inauguration. And while we expect people to still continue their workload and be responsible for their workload and their work, we also want to honor the notion that some people are going to be glued to the TV, and that's okay too. So that's just extra communication. Brenda, I'd love to know what's going on in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, thanks, Claude. Thanks for having me on, also Mike and the Robert Half team, and hi to everybody. I agree with everything that Claude mentioned, and there's also a couple points too that Steve talked about in the earlier part. I think leaders also talking about culture and re-looking at vision and values in this time. I think I saw a lot of that over this past year, whether it was values around resiliency, agility, talking about pivoting their organizations. These became a bit of buzzwords on Instagram and social media, but really at the heart, I think, of culture and strategy in a lot of organizations, it meant CEOs and leaders coming in and really rethinking how they communicate, how they make decisions. And so I think that was really at the height of the pandemic at the early onset, especially for a lot of small businesses, where we've seen that in the restaurant, hospitality, space, hotels, travel industry that have pretty much in a lot of cases plummeted in those sort of first couple of months of the pandemic, but have looked at how do they reposition themselves and have different offerings. I think similar to what Claude said about, really the emotional intelligence is the sensitivity, like the mental health check-in. I think that's something that I've seen a lot of organizations invest in as far as leadership development in more the back half of 2020. But I think as we go into 2021, knowing that we're still in this together, is instead of maybe leading off with the performance check-in and looking at results and goals, which I think are still important, we're still driving organizations forward and we still have accountabilities to our customers or our vendors or our communities, at the same time checking in with employees. Like the first question, instead of asking about maybe results and sales quotas, et cetera, is how are you doing? Like, no, really, how are you doing? And it's not the fine as an acceptable answer, but really digging in and understanding, I think, how people are showing up and how you are showing up as a leader too, and being vulnerable and showing those vulnerabilities. Back to you, Mike.
Those are great. Thank you. Claude, a question for you. There's a lot of, especially once March hit, many leaders and maybe first-time leaders never led remote teams. What type of tips would you share? What have you shared with, I guess, leaders even within your own business in terms of how to best lead their teams remotely?
Yeah, I think you said Claude. I wasn't quite sure, but so we've had to do a lot of training, and that training really has been around unconscious bias training. Interview training is a really big one. Orientation training. So we do a 4-day orientation for every single employee that starts, whether or not it's a C-suite person or a resident. Such as today, we have 25 people joining. Everyone sits together for 4 days, but leaning in that much more on, I think what Brenda said was really, really spot on, which is, how are you doing? Being human. Steve mentioned right now, we have the honor, by the way, I think it's an honor to look in on seeing how someone lives. By the way, also, it's very vulnerable for that person. Maybe, that's why I think Zoom and Google Hangouts have created these incredible filters, because not everyone wants to show you what their closet looks like or their bedroom looks like. So it really is, it's quite humbling, and to instruct our leaders in terms of how to step into that space is really, really crucial. Again, the holding space that I talked about. So we've been working with a career and life coaching company called the Handel Group, where every single employee, that's almost 1,000 people, has access to an online portal to do their own personal career development. So Mike would work on something and Brenda would work on something different. It's completely autonomous. I have no idea what you're talking about. Anonymous, I'm sure. I'm sorry, but really, we want to help people step into their own power, if you will. you know, and when I say like take up space, I really mean that. So we need to help our leaders with humility, with EQ, with self-awareness, all the things that we talk about, take up space, and we need to empower them to help others use their voices. And their voices could be anything from today is a really rough day and I'm not able to turn on the camera, to a new joiner or an introvert figuring out a way to use their voice on a screen where sometimes it's hard to get your, you know, yourself heard. But you know, the joke I kind of make is right now we all are equal. First of all, we're all equal anyway. We're all in this collective experience together. But we all take up the same size square. And I like that because I think it normalizes the playing field. So these types of conversations I have on a daily basis with leaders, as well as the training, as well as the coaching. But it does really, I think, really, it stems from the top for everyone to know what's expected of them to be a leader in 2021 at Vayner or wherever you are. And those expectations, I think, are things that need to be very consistent because we need to be speaking consistently, but we want people to be showing up consistently.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Brenda, I do have a question, and then the same one I'll post to Claude as well once you finish. But if you can take away one lesson from 2020 and the pandemic itself, not that it's gone, but if you can pick one, what was your biggest learning through 2020?
Oh, good question. Well, my biggest learning, I think it goes back to sort of my own personal reflections on how I showed up as a leader. For me, it was, you know, accumulation of everything that we've been sort of talking about already this morning. And the most important thing for me was really checking in with myself every day and making sure that, you know, there's that analogy of like, put your oxygen mask on first. People say that when it comes to leadership. I mean, it is actually a safety check that obviously we hear about every time we get onto an airplane. But that's it, right? It's just checking in with yourself first to ensure that, hey, am I okay? Are the kids okay? Like, you know, am I going to be able to start off the day well? Because I have to interact with so many people. And if there's something that I'm feeling unsure about, spiraling down about, you know, that's going to definitely reverberate across, depending on where my scope is and who I'm talking to. And, you know, and I do talk online quite a bit. I'm on social media. So it's like, I'm always checking in with myself to make sure that I'm okay. And that's, you know, it's the self-care. And I'm not talking about the mani-pedi self-care. It's the meditation. It's the breath work. It's going for a walk. It's like incorporating fitness, healthy eating. Like I doubled down on my green juice. Like there was just certain things that I did, both from like an immunity standpoint, but also really making sure from a mindfulness approach that I was okay every day. And there were some days that I weren't. And that's when I also took the opportunity to self-select out and just say, you know what, today's not a good day. Or maybe I should cancel this meeting. And, you know, people would be disappointed, but at the same time, I'd probably be better off not being in that meeting or not being on that Zoom call. Back to you, Mike.
All right, Claude, same question for you. Biggest takeaway in learning?
I think self-care is completely spot on. For me, prioritization of what I need to take care of and really what really matters. You know, the 99% of things that don't matter and all that noise, and that's stuff that I've really had to learn how to let go of and you know, empower others to let go of as well. But the one thing I will say, and it was a moment that was extremely humbling for me, was right after George Floyd and the riots. I held what I call courageous conversations. I hold them every single day, but this was a very large one where we came to work and people were just had a lot of emotion, and we were talking all different, you know, people that have been there for 9 years, 7 years, 3 weeks, joined this courageous conversation. And an employee that has been at Vayner for 8 years, I mean, a real OG, someone that we all know and love, said, she's a Black woman. She said, you know, Claude, I've never felt like I could bring my whole self to work. And it was a real moment for me because that's something that I had been saying. And understanding that it doesn't matter how much empathy I have or how right brain skewed I am or what a good person I am or whatever my parents say about me, at the end of the day, I only have the lived experience that I have. I'll never know what it's like to be in her shoes. And so that was a real eye opener for me. And I changed my language immediately. And in doing that, I think it opened up the conversation even more as we talk about DE&I and the importance of really, really building inclusivity at our core, not just diversity for the sake of diversity, and that has led me to be hiring a chief diversity officer as we speak. So that was a pretty big moment for me.
It's amazing, Claude. I think most of us will get goosebumps. I'm sure that conversation, it takes so much courage to get to that point where people do open up and show their vulnerability. So this is a great segue where we want to talk about one of the most critical areas of HR and how prevalent it's been, especially since March, the employee health and wellness. Would love to hear from the audience on this. And the question, the third poll question that we're going to put out there is, what do you feel is your biggest challenge when it comes to your health and wellness today? So the four choices: is it the work-life balance and integration? Yeah, we have the flexibility to work from home, but are people shutting down when they're supposed to? Or are we more connected than ever? Is it your mental and emotional health that's currently challenging for you? Is it a physical or nutritional challenge that you're trying to manage? I don't know about you, but it feels like I put on about 10 pounds working from home, which is not great. Or the fourth option is the lack of human connection and isolation. Again, many people have not even been back to the office once. So do we miss that? Give it a few seconds. Somewhat even in this one. So we got 30% with the mental emotional health, and tied for second place, work-life balance integration. So being able to, or having the difficulty of unplugging at home. And then the lack of human connection and isolation. All right, so we're gonna move with a question for Giselle, and we're gonna open it up talking about all mental health and wellness. So what are some of the key takeaways about mental health and wellness that you observed, Giselle, or experienced even personally? And really, where do we go from here?
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for the opportunity to respond to this, Mike. I really must say that 2020 was surreal. It was a year that actually exposed us to a lot about ourselves. I mean, myself personally, I actually started a new job and started working remotely and have never been into the office except I've never worked in the office. So it's been over 10 months, and that creates an interesting challenge for sure. What I found though about 2020 was that from teams working from home and people working from home, the elephant that was in the corner actually got moved right onto out of the corner onto the dining room table. And that elephant was mental health and wellness. Issues such as rapid change, where in fact, people were forced to move from the office to home very quickly, in some cases overnight. And now our firm, we did that rapid change within a matter of a week. There was also issues of uncertainty where folks were like, oh my gosh, my friends are losing their jobs. Am I going to have a job? If I lose my job, what am I going to do? Lots of uncertainty about what's with this pandemic. What does it mean? How do I move around? How do I stay connected? There was a lot of angst as well. And I would say that a lot of this was driven by the stuff we were hearing in the media. There wasn't a lot of positive news in the first few days of this pandemic. In 2020, it was a lot of negativity everywhere you turn, social media as well as the news online. Loss of freedom. Now, this was one that affected me tremendously, because I am someone who's very outgoing. So losing that ability to connect with friends and those social connections, or even the ability to move around as I wanted to, and being told that I had to be in lockdown, or I had to stay at home and not get to see my friends. These were some of the things that were challenges that I think many of us faced. But leaders were forced to address even deeper issues, not just the surface issues that we were seeing. There were isolation issues, loneliness and disconnection, some of the mood swings we were seeing from some of our teams. And then ultimately, there was also the fatigue of being on screen 100% of the time. All of these meetings on Zoom, WebEx, Teams, whatever platform you use, it really did take away from our ability to feel true connections. This definitely was not business as usual. So then what are some of the things we learned? I mean, I think it was a year that really taught us a lot. And from some of the stuff that Claude said, as well as Brenda, I believe self-care was one of the big ones. How to set boundaries for yourself. What are your limits? How do you build TLC into your day for yourself? And you know what? For some people, TLC is the massage. For some people, TLC is the walk. For some people, TLC is working out. But how do you put limits on working and then doing and being as you are in your regular everyday life? The issue of micro breaks was something that we learned as well. Building these into your calendar, because the lines between work and play became so blurred, because guess what? The dining room table was now the place where you were working, or the bedroom where you slept to get your rejuvenation at night was a place where you worked during the day. So the lines between were not as clear as they were. So learning to build micro breaks into our day was something that was really critical for us as well. The big thing in terms of conversations among, I found, not just thought leaders on LinkedIn and other platforms, but even among HR folks and leaders in general, was we started to see the destigmatization of mental health. People were asking questions about it. They were asking about, what does this mean? How can I support? How can I help? The conversations were no longer taboo. We have a long way to go still, but I think that there's an opportunity for us for sure to continue building on how well we're able to start talking about some of these mental and wellness issues that came up. The one thing that I saw that was really rampant among my team, and it's something that I feel that a lot of people are starting to figure out, is how to say no. How to opt out when you're not, as Brenda said, you know what, when you realize that you're not there and you're not 100% ready for that next meeting, how to defer, how to negotiate, and how to compromise. And like, you know what, I'm not there. You know what, I need more time. Or you know what, that deadline that you gave me, I need a little bit more time to be able to do this well. How to actually say no and negotiate. That was something I saw a lot of folks learning and putting into practice. Building resilience was another thing. How, in a nutshell, resilience is how to bounce back. I think for a lot of people, it was how do you create the space so that you can take this negative and transform it or reinvent it or reframe it. There's a website out there, HealthLink BC, that it's a great resource. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. A lot of us, one of the things that I found was really helpful for me was meditation. I actually turned to meditation as a way to sort of build that resilience for myself, to do the reset, to quieten the noise so that eventually I can get to a place where I can actually think and I could hear myself think. Because with all the stimuli, it was so challenging to find space to even step back and take a look. Okay, where do I go from here? Empathy and vulnerability were some other things that we learned. How to create authentic connections, how not to be afraid to ask for help. I know Brene Brown was really good about talking about vulnerability, and it was something that was starting to gain some momentum as well. I think it exploded in 2020, and it's going to be something that's going to continue to go forward as we try to create better connections with our teams, better connections with the people that we work with, because it's no longer going to be acceptable to have a surface type relationship. I'm not asking you what are you having for dinner at night, but I'm getting to know you as the person. As we talked about earlier, seeing into people's lives, seeing to their homes, you're getting a bit of a glimpse into, wow, this is a dimension of this person that I never thought about or I never even, considered. It helps you to see them as someone real. And as Claude said, the fact that we're all on the same playing field, we're all in this together as well, it really puts us on a platform where we're all in a place where we can have the same kind of conversations because we're having similar experiences. And last but not least, one of the things that we learn is it's okay to still have fun, how to inject fun and laughter as a bit of a medicine to help you work through it. I know one of my teammates, she actually developed this weekly initiative for us where it's 15 minutes of fun, where every week she would send us this placeholder for 15 minutes of fun. We never knew what it was going to be. It could be anything from two truths and a lie to a secret guest or a mystery guest who would come in and share stuff about the parts of the company that folks never knew about, or share stuff about themselves. And those kinds of events, the team started looking forward to it. And I believe that's a great way to remind us that, you know what, there's so much serious stuff happening around us. It's still important to be able to laugh. It's still important to be able to inject some fun into what we do. But you know what? Are you going to remember to do all of these things that I suggested? Absolutely not. It's impractical to think that you can do it all. So my advice is take one or two of these things and drill deep. Build on them as you build on a muscle, and flex it so that eventually you'll be strong enough so that it can actually flex on its own. There was a quote from Bruce Lee that I thought was really interesting to give you a sense of how important it is to focus. And he said, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. So the idea of developing that strong competence in that one or two things that you find to be important, whether it is setting boundaries, whether it is, building resilience, whatever that it is for you, take it and drill deep with it. And as I said, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to make some mistakes. You're going to bang your head against the wall sometimes when you're not making the progress, but eventually you will succeed. There's an interesting quote from Dr. Brian Robinson, that he says, grass grows through concrete. And that speaks to perseverance. So the more you persevere, the more you'll be able to kind of eventually have that breakthrough. So without too much more, the 4 key things that I'd like you to take away: build resilience, find ways to calm your mind, meditate either through Headspace, Calm, all the different apps that are out there. There are ways that you can learn how to do that. Finding ways to calm the mind is going to be important to building resilience. Self-care, either through micro breaks, talking to friends, working out, creating boundaries. It's going to be really important to emphasize self-care as how we move forward into 2021. Turn off the noise. Sometimes it's really, really good to disconnect from media, social media and otherwise. Sometimes less is more. It gives you a chance to just get back to your thoughts and get calm so that you can actually make sense of what your steps forward are going to be. And last but not least, laugh more and have some fun. Life's too short. We realize that, you know what, in a blink of an eye, things can change, and there are many things we won't have control over. So why not have fun in the little things that we can, and, count our blessings? Because I think, having come through 2020, we have a lot to be thankful for, and we have a lot to look forward to in 2021. Back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Giselle. I think there's so many great nuggets in there, and I think that resilience is one of the big ones. I think that we maybe even underestimate how resilient people can be through 2020. So thanks for sharing all that. Claude, I do have a quick question before we go into the final poll question, and the question that I wanted to pose to you is, and it came from the Q&A actually. We know that unplugging is difficult for a lot of people, especially working from home. And, is there any initiatives that you guys have taken on, or any suggestions that you've been able to influence within Vayner to make sure people don't burn out?
Yeah, burnout, it's a question I think that's on all of our minds. Burnout is real. I think that echo everything Giselle said. There's an enormous amount of fear in the system. And so how do we find the fear, remove the fear, and deploy more psychological safety throughout the organization? The way that we have found to at least humanize what we're all going through is to just share, whether or not that's Gary sharing the importance of sleep, whether or not that's me sending out a Slack message that just says literally for everyone in the US, because I'm not hitting Singapore right now, in the next 20 minutes, do 10 jumping jacks and take a walk outside. Like literally, that's what I say. We have someone that's doing at 3 o'clock, every day at 3 o'clock East Coast time, they do a plank session. So, they all get together and they do these planks. We have meditation every day at 12:30. So there's things that are on people's calendars. We hope are reminding them to take these micro breaks, which are extremely important. I mean, we used to take them walking to the bathroom or going to the water station to get your, your water jug filled up again, where we could just like cognitively check out. And then really team to team, you're just putting a note up on Slack that says, I'm taking 30 minutes out, I'm going for lunch, those types of things. But I really think the only way to get that into the water stream is to do it, is to be repetitive and consistent about it. And whether or not that's messages from me, and I ask other leaders to do that too. It shouldn't only just come from me or from Gary. We need consistency right now. And we need to remind one another that, again, we're in it together, and there is a lot of light. Amidst the darkness, there is a heck of a lot of light. And, grass does grow through cracks.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you both, Giselle and Claude, on this one. So for our final topic today, we're going to explore and really talk about the critical importance of diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging in today's workplace. We would like to hear from you, the audience, on the final poll question, and it should be in front of you. So which of the following with the greatest impact has been implemented at your organization to support diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging? So we put a few options, and we'll give it a minute here. Answers are trickling in. All right. So a tie for first place, and we have 29% of the respondents saying that committees, so employee resource groups, which are great because those are the grassroots level types of groups that are created within organizations. And then there, on the flip side, on the spectrum, we have organizations that have nothing in place yet. So they're still on a journey of learning and figuring out what they can put in place to support diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. So I'm gonna open this up to Brenda. So for Brenda, I know that you've been instrumental in creating and sparking these conversations both online and with organizations you've been a part of. But over the last 12 months, have you been a part of a specific maybe initiative that you want to share that has sparked change and transformation when it comes to diversity, inclusion, equity, or belonging?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I'll answer that question. But first, a call out of thanks to Giselle for recognizing the HealthLink BC site and our call line. That's actually our employees at Provincial Health Services in the province of British Columbia, where I'm helping to support right now strategically on the HR team. So thanks for calling it out. It is a really great service that we offer to the citizens of British Columbia. And thanks for recognizing them. So Mike, going back to your question about diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging initiatives that really sparked up. So the past 8 months, and really for the bulk of the start of the pandemic, I came in to work with one of my clients, Provincial Health Services Authority. Normally they're a client of mine, but they asked me to come on board, as in my previous life before consulting, I was VP of HR, VP of operations in Vancouver-based companies. They asked me to come on board to help out with their HR leadership team. And one of the things that we really wanted to get re-sparked again was our initiatives around diversity, equity, inclusion, because we are frontline to the COVID response at PHSA. A lot of our HR strategies got shelved, not because we wanted to, but we had to really pivot and ensure that our teams were helping to support our frontline clinical practitioners. And so I came on board probably about May. So, kind of getting into, that pause between first wave and second wave in Canada, and started working with our Indigenous cultural safety team. So we pulled together groups of people, and this is led by one of our executive leadership team members, Donna Wilson, who actually has the Indigenous Cultural Safety Team under her scope. So together with HR and a cross-functional group of leaders, we pulled together a team, basically an advisory board. So I think that was one of the drop-down features, like what tactic did we go after the most? So policymaking is huge in healthcare, right? Like things sometimes don't always happen if we don't have policies. We are part of our provincial government, so policies and government go together. So for us, what's really critical is making sure that if we have a policy in place to eradicate racism, and that's really one of the things that we want to take a firm stand on. Up until then, we were talking about cultural safety, which sounds good, but at the end of the day, we just wanted to get rid of racism. We had claims of racism being brought up, reporting going on, and we weren't addressing it, and we weren't creating that culturally safe place. So I agree with doing all the employee resource groups, the training, etc. But if we don't have a culture that actually, and policies that actually eradicate racism, and that we will address it hands down and get rid of it out of our system, no matter what training, employee resource groups you put in place, it's not going to happen. And that's what we were seeing. We were doing the training before, we were doing the unconscious bias training, we were having the employee resource groups. We have a phenomenal program. It's called, it's an award-winning program. It's called Sanias Indigenous Cultural Safety Training that we have all of our healthcare employees across the province go through, and it's actually a public offering, so anyone can take it. It's a fabulous course. At the same time, we still had incidences of racism going on in our system. So I am a big believer in getting training out there, but if you don't go to the source of where it's happening, which is we actually stand firm that we will not allow racism in our system through a policy, then we can fix the other systematic issues. So that's the first thing that we took on. At the same time, because we had these issues of racism going on in our healthcare system and in PHSA, there was an investigation that was done over the summer in 2020 by Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafont. She's a retired judge, lawyer, and she did a report on racism in healthcare across the province of British Columbia. And together with the province of British Columbia, it's like Ministry of Health, she put together a report that's called In Plain Sight. And it's a phenomenal report, and I encourage anybody from any healthcare system or organization across Canada and the US to read it, because it really pulls out all of the different situations of racism in our Indigenous community across BC, but most especially with Indigenous women. And that was one of the biggest callouts that we saw, is that women in the Indigenous community are not getting fair treatment as far as healthcare. And so we took that really seriously. And so together with our anti-racism policy, we're also looking at how we can ensure through our clinical practitioners and how we service our patients across the province, is that we're taking that into specific care. What else can I share with you? I think the other thing that we also wanted to look at is, building this cross-functional group of leaders, because at the end of the day, it also starts with leaders. We know that even after people go through training, it's going to be on the job where someone makes a remark or someone has an opinion or makes a decision, and leaders are going to hear about it, and we need them to feel confident to be able to address it. Call it out when a claim comes forward of racism, that they're not brushing it off aside. They're not saying, oh, maybe you're exaggerating, maybe you read too much into it, that they're actually addressing it, and they know where to get support from internal resources within the organization, whether that's HR or our groups, that our employee resource groups that are set up. So we wanted to really make sure that there was a cross-functional group of leaders that were working on this anti-racism policy. So we have representation from finance, analytics, the clinical operations, supply chain. So it's not just limited to our employee resource group, like the typical departments like HR that would be leading this work. It's a cross-functional group. And I think that's probably where I'll sort of land it right there. I do want Steve to be able to weigh in too and just hear from him and his perspective. So over to you, Steve.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much, Brenda. Listen, just a couple of quick points, because I know we're coming up on time here. I think the big issue with this whole topic is what we know in HR doesn't work. And let's be honest about it. Setting hiring quotas is maybe 3% of the solve, from my perspective. The true 95% is culture and leadership. You know, you can hire people in that are more diverse to your organization, but if they're not feeling welcome, they're not feeling like this is a place where they feel comfortable, they're not going to stay. So you're not solving the problem. And too many people that I'm encountering trying to address this worthy problem that's big and very complex. Think a hiring strategy is their way through it, and it's not. So we need to be honest about that. We also need to be honest as human beings that human nature is driving why this is so hard, because we feel safer around people, generally speaking, that look like us. So it's hard, and it's going to take, I think, really good debates at very, very senior levels to sort of come to terms with being honest. And as Claude was saying, like, be really honest about this and really transparent. It's not an easy topic. The great news is about COVID, last point here. The great news is about COVID. It's presented the ideal opportunity for us to change the hardest things in organizations, because everything in the world's changed. So the receptivity to doing things differently, I think, is greater than at any point in our working lives. And we may never see an opportunity like this again. So this is something we need to go after. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of success stories. There was an article in Business Insider that came out a few months ago about Salesforce, one of the most philanthropically minded, deep-pocketed, contributors to philanthropy, hired 4 years ago one of the flashiest, most talented heads of diversity that money could buy. And 4 years later, after they looked at many, many things they did not move the needle at all in any of the measurable categories that they wanted to. So if they can't do it, I think there's a lesson there. This is really, really hard. And there are some really bright, well-funded, initiatives that were a part of that. So anyway, it's worth going after, and now's the right time.
No, you're on point, Steve. I think that there's so much in there when it comes to having those courageous conversations, because these are situations where you almost need to be comfortable with having uncomfortable conversation with people to talk about these really important topics when it comes to all 4 points. Thank you both, Brenda and Steve, for your input on this specific topic. So we're going to segue to our Q&A. And I want to be conscious and respectful of everyone's time, because we are coming up on an hour. But one of the questions that did come up that was intriguing. I think this one is specifically to what Claude was talking about. So Claude, I'm going to put this out to you. How do you suggest senior management and executives help play a role in creating that safe space that you talked about? It's hard to encourage employees to open about their mental space and vulnerability and feel comfortable sharing with whether it's their peers or even uplines. Any ideas or anything that you can share with the crowd?
Yeah, it's the most valid question right now. I think the initiative and the mandate, I should say, needs to come from the top, which is we need to identify where fear and toxicity and cynicism live, and then we need to remove that. And that means you are going to be removing people, you're going to be removing processes, you're going to be looking at things under a microscope. But if there's one thing that I can say that I do and my team does on a daily basis, is how do you insert more psychological safety in on every single level? And you have to be very blunt about the fact that you are looking for fear, you are looking for micromanagement, you are looking for gossip, for on the island or off the island. There's a list of things that contribute to poor company culture, but especially poor company culture that stunts a person, that scares a person, that increases their anxiety so that their cortisol levels go up, and then they no longer perform at the level in which we expect them to, or they expect themselves to. So it's a hard conversation. It takes a lot of kind candor, radical candor, a lot of feedback, and having serious conversations with your upper management on down. Serious.
No, that's great. Thank you, Claude. All right, we're right on the hour. Again, I really appreciate Giselle, Brenda, Steve, the whole crew. You guys done just an exceptional job sharing your insights and your expertise. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will be circulating the questions that we weren't able to get to. And if you have any additional questions, my contact information is available for you, and I'd be more than happy to connect. Thank you again, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day ahead.